Take a seat.
Welcome everybody to this seminar or talk on the global financial crisis and where it will unfold from here. I think in about 25 years of working as a financial journalist and an economist, I don't think I've seen a single year in which so much action has been packed in. Just to take you through some of the milestones of this financial crisis that we witnessed just in this year. I mean, in March, we had the collapse of the investment bank Bear Stearns. Then, after being behind the curve for several years, the U.S. Federal Reserve went into overdrive and came out with probably the most radical policies since its inception in 1913. It has pumped more than $1 trillion into various financial institutions through a number of lending windows. It has taken distressed mortgage debt onto its books. It has bought corporate debt. It has put $130 billion to bail out AIG. It has put another $20 billion to bail out Citigroup and also $300 million in guarantees. Then we have seen the collapse of Lehman Brothers in September, the investment firm. And then we've seen the disappearance of investment banks as standalone entities. The remaining ones have become bank holding institutions. Then we've had a $700 billion bailout package from the U.S. Treasury. 3 days ago, the U.S. officially announced that it's in recession, and in fact has been in recession since December last year. We have recessions in Europe, in the UK, a recession in Singapore, a recession in Japan. It is an extraordinary time that we are living through, and in the month of course, the stock market has behaved accordingly. In the month of October, it's been pretty dramatic. In the week, in fact, from October 6th to October 10th, in that week alone, it lost 18%, the U.S. stock market, which is the worst performance in 100 years. So it's truly extraordinary, and we have with us today two people who I think have the best crystal balls in the business. On my right, Manu Bhaskaran, CEO of the Centennial Group, which is a corporate advisory and research firm based in Washington, D.C. He's the CEO in Singapore. And he does this as a full-time job, crystal ball gazing and research. On my left, we have Chua Hak, a friend of mine who's been in several firms in a research capacity. He's now head of equity research at Citigroup. The division of labor for this is Manu will talk, as I understand it, more about the macro picture, the economic picture, and a global perspective. And Hak will narrow down to the Singapore perspective, the Singapore economy, and the Singapore market. Just one request. This is open for reporting. However, Manu and Hak have both requested that you just check their quotes before you print anything. So without further ado, let me hand over first to Manu to give us the macro picture. Manu.
Thank you, Vikram. Thanks, Pat. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I'll try to be brief because the real meat is in Hak Bin's list of stocks to buy, which is what you're really waiting for. Okay, let me get to the heart and guts of it. I want to really talk about four things. One is that, we all know that the global economy is plunging, but what I'd like to sketch out is the pattern of that fall and why it matters to us in Asia and how it is going to affect us in Asia. And essentially the conclusion I will draw is that there are more shoes to drop. So basically this is going to be a very depressing talk, and those who want to leave can leave now. The second thing I want to talk about is that I think we will see a lot more economic shocks, financial stresses, to the point that the fear of deflation will become very, very real. And I think that will prompt very, very much more radical policy measures than we have seen. Even yesterday's radical rate cuts will be nothing compared to what they will need to do to address this very serious downturn. Thirdly, when we come down to Asia, clearly, given the multiple channels of transmission between the global economy and Asia, there is no escape for us. And I think we're going to go through a much worse downturn than most people have forecast. I think the next 6 months are going to be particularly painful. And I think by the end of next year, we could see many economies in deflation. And it would be bad deflation, not the good types of deflation that improve living standards and so on. Finally, having said all that, that's very depressing and all that, I am still convinced that if we try to guess what the post-crisis global landscape is going to be like, I would argue that while it will be much more subdued than in the years before, there will be enough in it that Asia can benefit from, and I still say that Asia will do extremely well post-crisis compared to most developing economic regions. So that's the agenda. First of all, what's happening in the global economy? Now, I don't need to tell you that the global economy is decelerating rapidly. You all know that. I think what is important is that, first of all, the trajectory of the downturn is particularly steep. If you look at all the high-frequency data, it goes like this and then sharp downturn starting in September, October. And that has continued into November. And it is affecting economies that you thought were going to be relatively insulated, such as China. Secondly, the pattern of the slowdown is particularly painful for us because it is affecting trade. Now, if you look at the various indicators that matter for us, you look at the global composite JP Morgan index of manufacturing services activity. This is the thing that drives global growth. It is down sharply. And you look at all the commentaries, it's all record low for each of the subcomponents, right? If you look at the Baltic Dry Index, which measures shipping rates, and that's a good barometer, day-to-day, high-frequency barometer of world trade, it is down like 90-something% from peak. And that is why, if you go to have your favorite East Coast seafood dinner at the East Coast Seafood Center, and you look out to the sea, you'll see what looks like a whole city in the eastern anchorage, because now there's so many ships that are idle and are basically being parked there that it looks like there's a whole city out there because they have to keep their lights on at night. And I hear from shipping agencies that the only thing that their customers are asking them is, find me anchorages for idle ships. Some people estimate that 20% of dry bulk carriers are idle now. That's huge. Just a few months ago, there was such a shortage that, say, a typical dry bulk carrier taking, say, sugar within Asia or iron ore from Australia to China would be chartered out at, say, $4,000 per day. Today, the shipping company is lucky if it gets $450, So this is very severe, and trade is affected. Trade drives Asia, therefore we are going to be affected particularly badly. The other thing that's happening is that, of course, in the major economies, particularly the United States, there is no sign of an economic bottom. I mean, some people have been hoping for some sign that the housing sector is going to find a bottom, and they look hopefully at some existing home sales of this particular thing and all that. But the best indicator for me is the home builders index, because home builders know what their pipeline of orders is like. We don't know. They know. And that home builders index just keeps going down and down and down. It was above 100 a couple of years ago. It is now, I think, at 14. Unbelievably low. There is no bottom in sight for a while. The other thing that's worth noting is Chinese data. Now, the Chinese economy is difficult to analyze because Chinese GDP is whatever the Chinese authorities want it to be. So one has to look beyond the data. You cannot believe export data, you cannot believe GDP data, you cannot believe half the things that they say. But you can believe the Purchasing Manager Index data, because this is based on several thousand companies, and it is double-checked by a private sector PMI done by CLSA. And this clearly shows that manufacturing is in distress. You cannot believe the national house price data, but you can believe the municipal level data. And that shows clearly that in major metropolitan areas, as well as second-tier cities, housing is in distress in China. And there is great anecdotal evidence of corporate sector distress as well. So I think the risks in China are a lot higher than it seems to be the case. So that's where we are right now. So what's happening, I think, when you see this kind of sharp thing, this is not just a deceleration in underlying demand, because underlying demand rarely corrects like that. There's an additional problem, and I think that is the collapse in trade financing, reflecting the severe weakening of the financial mechanism. So you have lots of evidence showing that people actually want to transact trade. Underlying demand, excuse me, underlying demand is there, but people can't find the trade financing. So no letters of credit, the iron ore is not exported, the wood products, whatever, not exported. Doesn't happen. So I think we have two problems: financial system, and then of course the collapse in underlying demand, which is just beginning to come underway.
Take a seat.